You close the door, and for the first time that day you can breathe. Maybe you've never admitted it out loud. Maybe you've never found the right words. But there's something that happens inside you every time the doorbell rings. An involuntary contraction, a sudden heaviness in your chest, an almost physical desire not to answer. It's not anger. It's not contempt. It's something much quieter, and for that very reason much more disturbing. It's existential exhaustion at the mere idea of having to be there for someone else when you can barely be there for yourself. The world has taught you that liking people is the norm, that being sociable is healthy, that opening your home is generosity. And somehow, without realizing it, you've internalized that not liking to have visitors is a flaw in you, a character defect, emotional coldness, maybe even selfishness. You look around and see people who love having a full house, who are energized by conversation, who seem to flourish in the presence of others. And then you ask yourself silently, why can't I be like that? Why does it seem so burdensome to me? But what if I told you that the problem was never you? What if this deep discomfort, this almost desperate need to preserve your space, is not a symptom of social inadequacy, but a cry from your psychic structure asking to be heard? What if your home, that territory you protect so vehemently, is in fact the last refuge where you can still exist without a mask, without performance, without the brutal demand to be someone you are not at that moment? Today we're going to delve deep into this silent pain. We're going to understand why some souls simply can't receive visitors without feeling like they're betraying themselves. And let's discover that perhaps you were never antisocial. You were just all along too faithful to the one thing no one taught you to protect, your inner truth. Because there is a brutal difference between being alone and finally being able to be yourself. And few things in the modern world are as revolutionary as a closed door. So take a deep breath. Because what you're about to discover about yourself will not cure you of loneliness. It will teach you that perhaps you were never sick. There is a specific moment that you know well. The doorbell rings. You are at home, comfortable, immersed in your silence. Not in emptiness, but in that rare kind of stillness where your soul can finally reorganize itself. And then suddenly someone is on the other side of the door. Maybe it's a friend. Maybe it's a family member. It doesn't matter. What matters is the feeling that comes even before you open the door. A tightness in your chest, an instant fatigue, a visceral resistance that you can't explain, and that for that very reason fills you with guilt. You open the door, you smile, you invite them in, and as the person enters your living room, something inside you withdraws. It's not aggression, it's not contempt, it's defense. Because in that instant, your last refuge is no longer yours. The space where you could exist without translation, without editing, without the constant performance of being minimally acceptable to the world. That space has just been invaded. And you know with painful clarity that for the next few minutes or hours you won't be able to be yourself. You'll have to be the social version of yourself. The version that makes coffee, that smiles at the right time, that pretends to be comfortable when in fact you're counting the seconds until the person leaves. And worst of all, you hate yourself for it. Because the world has told you that to love is to receive, that friendship is presence, that loneliness is a disease. So you interpret your own discomfort as a moral failure, as an inability to love, as profound selfishness. But here's the truth that no one has told you. Maybe your home isn't antisocial. Maybe it's just the last free territory of performance. The last place where you don't have to pretend you're fine when you're not. That you're available when you're exhausted. That you're present when you can barely recognize yourself. Schopenhauer, the German philosopher who spent his life studying the nature of human will, said something disturbing. That constant socialization is, for some souls, a silent violence. Not because people are bad, but because there are psychic structures that feed from the inside out, not from the outside in. For these souls, and perhaps you are one of them, loneliness is not absence. It is presence, presence of oneself. And every time someone enters your space without your psyche being ready, it is as if you were torn from within yourself and forced to inhabit a social shell that no longer fits. Think of it this way. You have a reserve of energy, not physical energy, but psychic energy. That invisible force that allows you to be in the world, interact, respond, be available. For some people, this energy recharges through contact. They talk, connect, and come away invigorated. But for you, the movement is the opposite. Every interaction is a debit. Every conversation, no matter how genuine, is a withdrawal from your internal account. And when you get home, you're not just tired, you're in the red. You need with existential urgency, silence, emptiness, no one. And then someone rings the doorbell, and you know you're going to have to withdraw from an account that's already empty. You're going to have to smile with a face that can barely hold itself up. You're going to have to perform hospitality when what you really need is to close the door, lie down on the floor, and simply exist without witnesses. Because that's what home should be, the place where you have no witnesses, where you can be fragmented, confused, sad, empty, tired, without having to justify yourself, without having to translate, without having to be palatable. But then the visitor arrives, and suddenly your refuge becomes a stage, your intimacy becomes a setting, and you, who were finally beginning to recognize yourself in the mirror, have to put on the mask again that you swore you would only wear outside. The difference is that outside you know it's theater, but when theater invades your home, when you no longer have a place where you can take off your costume, something inside you begins to suffocate. It's not dramatic, it's not visible, but it's real. It's the feeling that you're losing the only space where you could still be true. And perhaps the scariest thing is realizing that you're not just tired of others. You're tired of who you need to be in front of them. You're tired of the edited, friendly, functional version of yourself. You're tired of pretending you're whole when you're in pieces. You're tired of smiling when you want to scream. You're tired of saying it's okay when nothing is okay. And your home, that small, imperfect space, is the only place where you can still admit it, where you can be the mess you really are without fear of being judged, abandoned, or fixed. That's why the doorbell isn't just a sound, it's an alert. It's a warning that you're going to have to be someone again. And you're so tired of being someone. You open the door, and as the person enters, something strange happens. You begin to observe your own home through their eyes. Suddenly, you notice the pile of dishes in the sink, the crumpled sofa, the book left on the floor, the light you like but which is perhaps too strange. Everything that was intimate and yours suddenly becomes an object of possible judgment. And without realizing it, you start to perform. Not consciously, but your body knows. Your voice changes, your face adjusts. You become a host. And by becoming a host, you cease to be yourself. Nietzsche had an obsession with masks. He said that we live imprisoned in social roles, playing characters that have been imposed on us since childhood. And one of the most tyrannical, most invisible, most accepted as normal roles is that of the good host, the one who welcomes others, who is always available, who turns their home into a public space, their intimacy into a spectacle, their energy into a commodity to be distributed to anyone who rings the doorbell. But here's the problem. No one asked you if you wanted this role. No one gave you permission to refuse. You were simply told since childhood that liking people is a virtue, that receiving visitors is a sign of mental health, that preferring solitude is a symptom of something wrong. And you, wanting to be loved, wanting to be accepted, learned to open the door even when every cell in your body screamed to keep it closed. And now, you're in your living room. There's someone sitting on your couch, and you realize, with piercing clarity, that you're acting. You're choosing your words, controlling your expressions, measuring your tone of voice, calculating the acceptable length of silence before it becomes awkward. You are editing every gesture, every pause, every breath to fit the version of yourself that this person expects to find. And while you do this, the real you, the one that only exists when no one is looking, is hidden in some dark corner of your psyche, waiting for the play to end so you can return. It's exhausting. Not the kind of tiredness that a night's sleep can fix, but that deep existential tiredness that comes from repeatedly betraying yourself, from stifling your truth to fit into a social script you never chose to star in. And the worst part is that no one sees it. To the person in front of you, you're being kind, you're present, you're fine. But inside you're counting the minutes. You're praying for them to leave soon. You're fantasizing about the moment when the door will close and you'll finally be able to break down. Think of your home as an empty theater. When you're alone, the lights are off. There's no audience, there's no script. You can walk barefoot, talk to yourself, cry for no reason, laugh at inside jokes, spend hours staring into space. You can be weird, vulnerable, ridiculous, human. But the moment someone walks in, the lights come on, the stage is set, and you are suddenly an actor. And actors can't break character. Actors can't say, I can't do it today. Actors have to deliver the performance. And you deliver. You always deliver. Until one day you realize that you no longer know where the performance ends and where you begin. And then comes the guilt. Because the person in front of you did nothing wrong. They came with good intentions. Maybe even with genuine affection. But you can't relax. You can't be spontaneous. Every second seems to weigh a ton. And you ask yourself, what's wrong with me? Why can't I just enjoy the company of someone I even like? And the answer, the brutal truth that no one explains to you, is this. Because you're not tired of the person. You're tired of who you have to be around them. You're tired of the acceptable version of yourself. The version that can't be too vulnerable, too distant, too intense, or too empty. The version that always has to be at a palatable midpoint of humanity. And your home, which should be the only place where you can be anything, becomes yet another stage, another place where you can't be true. And when you lose the last space where you could be real, you don't just lose your home, you lose yourself. And then you close the door. The visitor is gone. And for the first time in hours, you can take off the mask. You can let out the breath you've been holding. You can let your face fall. And in that moment, you feel something devastating. Relief. Relief at being alone. Relief at no longer having to be anyone. And along with the relief comes guilt, because you think good people don't feel relief when others leave. Good people, you've been told, enjoy company. But maybe you were never bad. Maybe you were just all along too honest with your own exhaustion. But there is something even more disturbing going on. Something that operates in the invisible layers of your psyche, in a territory you barely know, but which governs every reaction, every discomfort, every impulse to close the door before even opening it. Carl Jung called this the shadow. And the shadow is not what you think it is. It is not evil. It is not the bad side of you. It is everything you had to hide in order to be loved. Everything that was rejected, suppressed, exiled to the basements of your mind because it did not fit into the acceptable version of who you should be. And here is the truth that no one told you. Every time someone rings the doorbell, it is not just a person entering your home. It's an involuntary threat to the integrity of your shadow. Because the shadow lives in the parts of you that you hide. The anger you can't show, the sadness you can't admit, the emptiness you can't name, the tiredness you can't justify. And when there's someone in your living room, watching, talking, existing, you need to keep those parts locked away. You need to make sure they don't leak out. You need to maintain the facade. And that, my friend, is a silent internal war that happens every time you have a visitor. You know that strange feeling that sometimes comes out of nowhere. You're talking to someone, everything seems normal, but inside there's a growing irritation, a discomfort you can't explain. The person hasn't done anything wrong, but something about them, the tone of their voice, a seemingly innocent comment, the way they look at you, touches a wound you didn't even know was open. And suddenly, you want them to leave, not because they're bad, but because their presence is activating something in you that you've spent years trying not to look at. Jung said, "What you do not bring to consciousness will appear in your life as fate." And sometimes that fate manifests itself as inexplicable social discomfort. Like that visit that seems to suck your energy. Like that conversation that should be lighthearted, but leaves you exhausted for days. It's not the person. It's the involuntary mirror they become. It's their shadow touching yours. It's everything you buried coming back to the surface, asking to be seen. And the hardest truth? You know it. Unconsciously, you know it. That's why your body reacts before your mind understands. That's why you feel that tightness in your chest when the doorbell rings. Because your psyche is warning you. If you open that door now, you'll have to hold on to everything that's trying to fall apart. You'll have to pretend you're whole when you're in pieces. You'll have to lock the shadow in a dark corner while you smile and offer coffee. Think of it this way. Imagine your house is an aquarium. When you're alone, the water is calm. The sediment is at the bottom. Everything that is confusing, painful, unresolved is deposited down there, visible but stable. But when someone enters, it's as if someone has stirred the water. Suddenly, everything that was settled begins to float. The memories you avoid, the fears you don't name, the anger you don't allow yourself to feel, the sadness you swore you had overcome. All of this begins to cloud the water, and you urgently need to pretend that the water is still crystal clear. And here's the cruel trick. The shadow doesn't just contain darkness. It also holds light, talents you didn't have the courage to embrace, truths you weren't allowed to say, desires you learned to be ashamed of, dreams you locked away because they seemed impossible or inappropriate. All of that is there too, in the basement. And every time you force a social interaction when you're not ready, you're locking away not only the pain, you're locking away the possibility. So when you feel that visceral resistance to having visitors, your shadow may be saying something very simple and very profound. I need space. I need silence. I need you to stop pretending and start listening to me. And listening to your shadow is not cowardice. It is not selfishness. It is an act of brutal courage, because it means looking at everything you tried not to be and saying, you are also part of me, and you also deserve to exist. But the world doesn't teach that. The world teaches you to socialize, to be available, to be kind, receptive, present. And as you try to live up to these expectations, your shadow grows heavier, louder, more desperate to be recognized. And then someone rings the doorbell, and you open the door. And no matter how much you smile, no matter how hard you try, something inside you is screaming, not now. I don't have the energy to be fake today. I need to be real. And to be real, I need to be alone. And maybe, just maybe, this discomfort you feel isn't a flaw. It's a warning. An alarm from your psyche telling you that you're straying too far from yourself. That you're paying too much attention to the outside and too little to the inside. that you're feeding the persona and starving the soul. And your home, that space you protect so intensely, is the only place where the shadow can still breathe, where you can still be whole, with light and darkness, with clarity and confusion, with strength and fragility. And when someone invades that space without you being ready, it's not just a visit. It's a symbolic violation of something sacred. So let's talk about it, about what your home really is. Because it's not just an address. It's not just walls, furniture, and a door that opens and closes. In Jung's depth psychology, the home is one of the most powerful symbols of the human psyche. It is the map of your soul. Each room represents a part of who you are. The bedroom is your intimacy, your dreams, your naked vulnerability. The living room is your social mask, the space where you welcome the world. The kitchen is where you nourish yourself, or where you pretend to nourish yourself. The bathroom is the place of purification, where you look in the mirror and try to recognize yourself. The basement is the unconscious, everything you have buried. The attic is the lofty thoughts, the ideas you have not yet achieved. And the front door? The door is the border, the final line between you and the chaos of the world. And when someone crosses that line without your soul's permission, something profound is violated. Not in an aggressive way, not visibly, but symbolically, energetically, psychically. Because the house, for certain people, especially those in the process of individuation, of becoming who they really are, is a living organism. It breathes with you. It adjusts to your mood. It keeps your silences. It witnesses your crises. And when a foreign body enters, the house feels it. And you feel the house feeling it. Jung believed that we live in a world of symbols, that everything around us reflects something within us. And if your home reflects your soul, then every time you allow someone to enter without being emotionally prepared, you are symbolically letting them invade your psyche. Not because the person is bad, but because you haven't organized the rooms yet. You haven't swept up the broken pieces yet. You haven't closed the internal doors that need to remain closed. You are under construction, and construction sites are not ready for visitors. Think about how you feel when you finally get home after a long day. You open the door, you take off your shoes, you breathe out. And there is a physical, almost spiritual relief at being back in the only place where you don't have to explain yourself, where you can be messy, where you can be silent, where you can be anything because no one is watching. And that feeling, that deep relief, is what Jung would call a return to the self. The self is the center of your wholeness. It is where everything in you comes together, conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, persona and truth. And it needs space to exist. Physical space, symbolic space, protected space. But when there is someone in your room, the self has nowhere to hide. It is exposed, vulnerable, under scrutiny. And to protect itself, it retreats. You retreat. And what should be a home becomes an invisible battlefield between who you are trying to appear to be and who you really are at that moment. And no one sees this battle. No one notices. But you feel every blow. Every effort to keep up the facade while inside, you are falling apart. And here's the part that almost no one talks about. For some people, especially those undergoing profound internal transformations, home is not just a place of rest. It is a temple. It is where alchemy happens, where you go to break down and rebuild yourself, where you cry without an audience, where you scream without an echo, where you confront who you were, who you are, and who you don't yet know you want to be. And this process, this brutal and beautiful journey of becoming whole, cannot happen in public. It cannot happen with visitors. It cannot happen while you are smiling politely and offering cookies. Jung called this individuation. And individuation requires sacred solitude. It requires that you have a place where you can be completely honest with yourself, where you can take off all your masks and look at what's left. And what's left is often not pretty. It's not presentable. It's not something you want others to see, but it's real, and it's yours, and it deserves to be seen, felt, integrated, but only by you. No one else needs to witness this process. No one else has the right to be present while you are rebuilding yourself. So when you feel that deep resistance to having visitors, maybe it's not because you're cold, distant, or antisocial. Maybe it's because your soul is whispering, this house is still under construction, I'm still under construction, and I can't rebuild myself while pretending to be whole. And respecting that, honoring that, protecting that, it's not isolation. It's self-care at the deepest level. It's saying, my soul matters, and it needs space to exist without being judged, edited, or performed. And if someone doesn't understand that, maybe the problem was never you. Maybe the problem is living in a world that has confused physical presence with real connection, that has confused constant visits with genuine love, that has confused solitude with unhealthy loneliness. Because there is a huge difference between being alone because you are running away and being alone because you are finally arriving. But here's the problem. The world doesn't see that. The world sees someone who doesn't like to have visitors and concludes something cruel. This person is closed off. This person doesn't like people. This person has problems. And somehow you start to believe it too. You start to think there's something wrong with you because while everyone else seems to thrive in conversation circles, at dinners, in crowded houses, you feel exhausted just thinking about it. And then you try to force yourself. You accept invitations you don't want to accept. You open the door when you want to keep it closed. You smile when you want to disappear. All because you've been taught since forever that socializing is healthy, that connection is life, that loneliness is slow death. But Jung saw it differently. For him, loneliness was not the opposite of connection. It was the path to it. Because only when you are truly alone, without external noise, without other people's expectations, without social masks, can you hear your own voice. Only there, in that uncomfortable silence that most people flee from, can you ask yourself, who am I when no one is looking? What do I really feel when I don't have to translate it for anyone? What is my soul asking me to stop ignoring? And those questions, my friend, are dangerous, because the answers can dismantle everything you've built to be accepted. They may reveal that you don't want what everyone else wants, that you're not as happy as you should be, that maybe, just maybe, the life you're living isn't yours. It's the approved, edited, palatable version of a life that someone said would be good for you. And realizing that, facing that, is devastating, but it's also liberating. Because only when you admit that you're lost, can you begin to find yourself. And that's exactly why discomfort with visitors can actually be the beginning of something sacred. The beginning of the process Jung called individuation. The path to becoming who you really are, not what the world expects you to be. And that path doesn't start with motivational workshops or Instagram-worthy spiritual retreats. It starts when you close the door, when you say no, when you deliberately choose to be alone, even though you know you'll be judged for it. Because individuation doesn't happen in noise. It happens in silence, in discomfort, in boredom, in the emptiness you fear so much. It is there when there are no distractions, when there is no one to impress, when you are completely naked before yourself, that the false layers begin to fall away. And what remains is not beautiful. It is not what you imagined, but it is real. And real in this world of constant performance is revolutionary. So, if you feel this almost physical need to be alone, if the idea of having visitors fills you with dread, if you prefer the silence of your home to the noise of any social gathering, perhaps your soul is telling you something you need to hear. Stop, breathe, turn inward, because there is something here you need to see, something you are avoiding, something that can only be found when you stop running to the outside and finally turn to the inside. And that's scary, because turning inward means facing everything you've kept there, the unanswered questions, the unhealed pains, the dreams you've killed, the versions of yourself you've betrayed to be accepted. It means admitting that maybe you don't know who you are, that maybe you've spent so much time being what others needed that you've forgotten what you wanted. And that admission, that moment of I don't know who I am when no one is asking anything of me, is terrifying. But it's also the turning point. It's when the real transformation begins. And if you're feeling that right now, that restlessness, that deep discomfort, that sense that something inside you is demanding attention, then you're in the right place. Not geographically, but existentially. You're on the threshold, in that space between who you were and who you can become. And that space requires solitude. It requires you to turn off your phone, close the door, and finally sit with yourself without excuses, without distractions, without anyone to save, impress, or entertain. And if you want to deepen this journey, if you want to explore more about how philosophy can help you understand these silent pains that no one talks about, subscribe to the channel. Because here we don't run away from discomfort, we embrace it. We dismantle the lies we've been told about how we should be and rebuild piece by piece a life that makes sense for who you really are. Turn on the bell because every week there's a new video that will make you question everything you thought you knew about yourself. But back to the point. This process of individuation, of becoming whole, is not linear. It's not fast. And it's definitely not comfortable. Because it means integrating everything you've rejected. The shadow, the pain, the anger, the fear, the shame. It means stopping pretending that you're only light and admitting that you're also darkness, that you're also contradiction, that you're also mess, and that all of this, absolutely all of this, deserves to exist. And while you're in this process, while you're dismantling and reassembling your own psyche, the last thing you need is an audience. The last thing you need is someone in your living room watching you, judging you, or worse, demanding that you be functional, friendly, present, because you're not functional. You're in metamorphosis, and metamorphoses are ugly. They're painful, they're slow, and no one needs to see that happening. So my friend, if you can't have visitors, it's not because you're selfish. It's because you're being faithful to a process that most people don't even know exists. You are honoring something greater than social education. You are honoring your own soul. And that, in a world that has taught you to put everyone else before yourself, is an act of silent rebellion. It is an act of radical self-love. It is saying, I matter, and what is happening inside me matters more than what you will think of me. And maybe that's what the world can't stand. Not that you are alone, but that you have chosen to be alone. That you have deliberately closed the door. That you have said no, because in a world that profits from your attention, your availability, your constant presence, someone who withdraws, who closes themselves off, who says not today, not now, maybe never, that person is dangerous, because they are saying that there is something more important than being seen, and that breaks the game. And now let's talk about a figure you may know but never really understood. The hermit, the recluse, that old man with a long beard alone on the mountain, carrying a lantern in the darkness. You've seen this image 1,000 times, in tarot cards, in ancient stories, in forgotten symbols. And you probably thought it was about pathological isolation, about someone who gave up on the world, about loneliness as defeat. But Jung saw something completely different. For him, the hermit was not someone who ran away. He was someone who descended. He descended into himself, into the deepest layers of the psyche, to places that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. And he carries a lantern not because the world outside is dark, but because the world inside is. And only those who have the courage to enter their own darkness can find their own light. And that light, my friend, does not come from outside. It does not come from social approval. It does not come from likes, validation, visits, or always being available. It comes from a place that only you can access. And to access it, you need to be completely, radically, frighteningly alone. The hermit is an archetype. And archetypes in Jung's language are universal patterns that live in the collective unconscious. They exist in all cultures, in all times, because they represent something deeply human. And the archetype of the hermit is not about rejection of the world, it is about the call to introspection. It is about that moment in life when you realize that you cannot continue living on the surface, that you need to stop, that you need to withdraw, that you need to turn off the phone, lock the door, and finally ask yourself, who am I when no one is telling me who I should be? And if you feel that call, if you prefer to stay home, if visitors drain you, if silence nourishes you more than any conversation, then maybe the hermit is calling you. And that's not a disease. It's not a flaw. It's a sacred invitation to a journey that very few people have the courage to take, because that journey doesn't take you outside. It takes you into the abyss within you. And down there, deep down, where no one else can go, you find the only thing no one can give you, yourself. But here's the crushing truth. The world hates the hermit. It hates him because he doesn't play the game. He's not available. He doesn't respond quickly. He's not always online, always present, always willing to give his energy to anyone who asks. He has withdrawn. And in a world that measures value by productivity, by visibility, by constant engagement, someone who withdraws is seen as a failure, as someone who gave up, as someone who can't handle life. But the hermit didn't give up. He just understood something that most will never understand, that you can't be truly present in the world if you're not present in yourself first, that you cannot love others if you have not learned to inhabit your own company, that you cannot give what you do not have. And if you do not have inner peace, if you do not have clarity, if you do not know who you are when you are alone, then all you offer the world is performance. It is a facade. It is the version of you that survives but does not live. And maybe that is what you are feeling. Maybe you're not antisocial. Maybe you're just being called inward. Maybe your inner hermit is turning on the lantern and saying, come, it's time. It's time to stop pretending you're okay out there and start building something real in here. And to follow that call, to honor that need, to protect that space, it's not selfishness. It's wisdom, it's spiritual maturity. It's recognizing that before you can be someone's friend, before you can be a child, a parent, a partner, a colleague, you need to be you. And being you takes time. It takes silence. It takes sacred solitude. And here's the most beautiful paradox. When you finally honor the hermit, when you stop forcing yourself to be social and allow your soul to rest, something strange happens. You don't become more isolated. You become more whole. And when you are whole, when you are no longer fragmenting yourself to fit into other people's expectations, your connections change. They become smaller but deeper, less frequent but more real. Because you are no longer connecting out of obligation, out of fear of rejection, out of a need for approval. You are connecting because you want to, because you chose to, because there is real space inside you to receive the other without losing yourself in the process. But to get there, you have to go through the cave. You have to go through the darkness. You have to accept that for a while, maybe a long while, you will be alone and it will be uncomfortable. And people will judge you and you will wonder if you're doing the right thing. But deep down, in a part of you that still knows the truth, you will feel something you haven't felt in a long time. Relief. Because finally, you are stopping betraying yourself to please a world that never asked you to be your true self. The hermit does not run away from life. He prepares himself to live it truthfully. He descends so he can climb back up whole. He withdraws so he can return real. And if you are on this path now, if you are closing doors, refusing invitations, choosing silence over noise, know this: you are not missing anything. You are finding everything. So the question remains, how do you live this? How do you honor this need to be alone without losing yourself in guilt? How do you protect your space without becoming an impenetrable fortress? How do you balance the hermit who needs silence with the human who still needs in some way connection? And here's the answer that no one wants to hear, but that everyone needs. There is no formula. There is no manual. There is no exact point where you are cured and suddenly start to enjoy visitors. Because maybe you'll never enjoy it. Maybe you'll always prefer your own company. And not only is that okay, it's perfect. Because you don't have to be like everyone else. You don't have to like what everyone else likes. You don't have to fit into a collective definition of mental health that was built for people who are not you. What you need is to learn to listen. Listen to your body when it says not today. Listen to your mind when it asks for a break. Listen to your soul when it whispers that it needs space. And then, the hardest part, respecting that. Even when they call you cold. Even when they accuse you of being distant. Even when they say you've changed, that you're not the same as before. Because maybe you have changed. Maybe you are finally becoming who you always were underneath all the layers of expectation. And respecting your limits isn't about building walls. It's about building doors. Doors that you control. Doors that you open when you want, to whom you want, the way you want. Because the difference between isolation and conscious solitude is choice. Isolation is when you close yourself off because you're afraid, because you've been hurt, because you don't trust. Conscious solitude is when you close yourself off because you know you need to, because you understand that being alone now is the only way to be whole later. And that means you can create rituals. You can establish sacred moments that are yours alone. A morning without looking at your phone, an afternoon reading alone, an evening with no one else, no plans, no obligation to be sociable. You can communicate this. You don't have to justify yourself. You don't have to explain your entire psyche to those who won't understand. But you can say clearly and kindly, I need time alone. It's not about you, it's about me. And I need you to respect that. And the people who truly love you will respect that. They may not understand, they may find it strange, but they will respect it. And those who don't respect it, those who insist, those who make you feel guilty for having boundaries, those people are showing you something important. They don't want you. They want the version of you that serves them. And you're not obligated to be that version. You're not obligated to fragment yourself to fit into anyone's emotional comfort zone. And here's the liberating part. When you stop trying to please everyone, when you stop opening the door out of obligation, when you stop saying yes when you want to say no, something changes. Your relationships become smaller, but they become real. You lose quantity, but you gain quality. Because the people who stay, the ones who respect your pace, your space, your need to be alone, those are the people who deserve to be in your life. And with them, curiously, you don't feel so drained, because they don't demand that you be someone you're not. They allow you to be exactly who you are right now. And that, my friend, is rare. It's precious. It's sacred. But until you reach those people, until you build those real connections, you'll need to go through a desert. You'll need to disappoint people. You'll need to be misunderstood. You'll need to hear that you're exaggerating, that you're being dramatic, that you're isolating yourself too much. And it will hurt. But not as much as continuing to betray yourself. Not as much as continuing to open the door when your body is screaming to keep it closed. Not as much as continuing to pretend you're fine when you're broken. So here's the final invitation. Honor your soul. Honor your need for silence. Honor your rhythm, which is different from the rhythm of the world, and that's okay. Because life isn't about always being available. It's about being truly present. And you can only be present when you've stopped abandoning yourself. Create your sacred space. It can be a corner of your house. It can be an hour of the day. It can be a day of the week. But create a place, a time, where you don't have to be anything but yourself. Where there is no audience. Where there is no judgment. Where you can be messy, silent, confused, clear, all at the same time. And protect that. Protect it as you would protect something sacred. Because it is. And when the guilt comes, and it will come, when that voice comes saying, you should be more sociable, you should like people, you should be normal, remember this. You don't have to be normal. You need to be you. And if you're someone who needs a lot of time alone, who doesn't like visitors, who prefers silence to conversation, then that's not a flaw. It's design. It's how your soul was made. And trying to change that is like trying to make a tree grow downwards. It doesn't work, it just hurts. So stop forcing yourself. Stop blaming yourself. Stop thinking that one day you'll wake up and suddenly love having visitors. Maybe not. And that's okay. Because you're not here to live the life they told you should live. You're here to live your own. And yours may be quiet. It may be lonely. It may be radically different from what everyone around you is doing. And yet, or precisely because of that, it can be deeply, devastatingly, beautifully yours. So breathe. Close the door if you need to. Turn off the phone. Decline the invitation. Say no without justifying yourself. And know with every fiber of your being that you are not being selfish. You are being true to yourself. And being true to yourself in a world that teaches you to betray your soul every day is the most revolutionary act there is. And if you want to continue this journey, if you want to explore more about how to build a life that is truly yours, leave a comment here. Have you ever felt that you need to be alone to recognize yourself again? I want to know if you go through this too. If you also close the door and feel that deep relief of finally being able to take off the mask. If you've made it this far, you've already taken a step beyond most people. You watch the videos. You reflect on each idea. Now the question is, how far do you want to go with this? If you want to take the next step and truly apply this knowledge to your life, the White Rabbit codes are ready for you. The link is in the video description. Remember, success is a decision. The choice is yours. Count on me and follow the White Rabbit. Because in the end, maybe you were never antisocial. Maybe you were just all along the most honest person in the room. The only one willing to admit that you're tired of pretending. And that honesty, my friend, is where it all begins. Is where you finally stop living the life you were taught and start building the life that only you can live. Alone, in peace, whole, and finally, devastatingly, free.